Medway is renowned for the beauty of its sunsets. A glowing red sky with a westering sun can be a magical sight. But there's a reason for this, and it's not a healthy one. To explain, we need to go back a bit. In the first half of the 19th century, artists often painted incredible sunsets. This was partly because there were a number of huge volcanoes at the time. Tambora, an Indonesian volcanic island that literally blew its stack in April 1815, was the most famous. It is supposed to have been the largest ever volcano in recorded history and threw up so much dust it led to the year without a summer. Sunlight was blocked out, crops did not grow, and people starved. There were other huge volcanoes at the time too. Cosiguina in Nicaragua in 1835 probably created the dust that made the super red charged atmosphere for J.M.W. Turner's Fighting Temeraire painting in 1838. Volcanic dust filters out the blue wavelengths as the sun approaches the horizon. That's when sun rays have to pass through the maximum amount of dusty air. These days, we don't need a volcano to have red skies in Medway. Pollution throws up such huge quantities of PM2.5, tiny bits of grit and dirt, that Medway's air quality is well below minimum standards laid down by the World Health Organization. It's the equivalent of a human volcano right on our doorstep, and it blows its stack every day.
It's dangerous to breathe in Medway. Tiny bits of grit, known by the boffins as particulate matter, are in the air in such quantity that they top World Health Organization danger levels. The toxic grit or dust, known as PM2.5, is tiny, invisible and odourless, so there is no way you can detect it. It is so small it can easily pass into and out of the bloodstream and can even get into the brain. World Health Organization guidelines lay down a danger level of 10 micrograms of PM2.5 in a cubic metre of air. 30 councils in South East England are over the limit, with Medway in the most dangerous 4 at 11.5 micrograms of PM2.5 in a cubic metre. We can't see them, but every day we all breathe in tiny toxic particles which damage our heart and circulatory health, said Jacob West, British Heart Foundation's Director of Healthcare Innovation. They are an invisible killer. We must not become complacent and accept that dirty air is a part of normal life. The British Heart Foundation says breathing the toxic air leads to blood clots and may even cause heart attacks. PM2.5 comes from the exhaust pipe of diesel and petrol vehicles, as well as industry and shipping.
My name is Alan Legree. I'm a retired Church of England priest living in Chatham with my wife. I've been ordained for about 45 years and I spent a lot of that time in parish ministry in various places around the southeast. And then more latterly I've been involved in teaching, theological education in various institutions until I retired about 3 or 4 years ago. I was reminded recently about a gap year that I had as a very young teenager, an 18-year-old, after I'd finished my A-levels, had a year out before going to university to read theology. And during that time I had a really good job which I thoroughly enjoyed, working in a small section of the traffic department at Stevenage Development Corporation, as it was then in those days. It's been subsumed into the Stevenage Borough Council these days. And I found myself on the margins of a much larger project, which was looking at the cost of the road infrastructure that we were having to put into the new town. And some people started to ask questions about how much it actually costs when you tot up the cost not just of construction, but of all the infrastructure that has to go with it. So you've got car parks, you've got all the traffic regulations, you've got the policing, got a whole range of things, all the way down to things which I would never have thought of, but came across some research from the Road Research Laboratory, as it was then, on how much it actually cost to have a fatal accident on these new roads that we're going to build. And at 1970 prices, it was costed out at, I think, £3,500 for each fatality that's around there. And when we did the arithmetic, the amount of money that it cost to build a new road was astronomical. So one of our senior engineers got this idea, what if instead of building the roads, we had an effective public transport system? So we were set up with a kind of fantasy brief. We were to imagine what it would be like if we were to set up a bus service in Stevenage that ran 24/7 throughout the year, 365 days of the year, where a bus was provided free of charge for everybody living in Stevenage, where nobody had to walk more than 200 metres to a bus stop, and they would never have to wait more than 10 minutes for a bus. And when we did this kind of fantasy calculation and worked out the cost of providing that free service compared with the cost of building the new roads, the cost of the free bus service was absolutely infinitesimal, a slight fraction of how much it was going to cost to provide the roads. And there was absolutely no comparison between them. So what did we do? As a corporation, of course, we committed ourselves to building the roads. And so we spent billions and billions of pounds developing an infrastructure when we could have done effectively the same job for much less money. There's something about some very serious political questions here, I think, which we are failing as a community to ask ourselves. For generations, we've had this fixation on private transport, and we've been encouraged more and more to have cars of our own. And the kind of myth is that if we've got our own car, we can move around freely, and we've got freedom of movement, we can do exactly what we like. And of course it's a complete fantasy. What in fact happens is that we not only destroy the environment and pollute everything and churn up the countryside, but in the process we have the privilege of sitting for hours and hours and hours in traffic jams. It's a no-brainer. Why don't we put that money into public transport? And you can see it in the political rhetoric that's used when we talk about the cost of providing transport. It's constantly the language of investment in infrastructure for things like roads and even to some extent in railways. But when we talk about public transport generally, it's subsidy. Now that language is loaded, it's biased already before you start. So we will put billions of pounds into building roads, whilst at the same time we will run down and make sure that public transport is depleted increasingly in terms of the need that's around there. It's complete nonsense, and yet we seem to be so fixated on this myth of freedom of movement that we are just continuing to make the same insane mistakes.
The thing about oil is that you could make very large amounts of money from it, but you were always, if you organised an oil corporation. But the problem is you were always vulnerable to the arrival of new oil supplies from somewhere else that would undercut you and take away your profits. And so throughout the 20th century, and it's different today, but in the 20th century, the problem for the oil producing corporations or companies was how do you limit the production of oil so as to keep it scarce? And you do it in two ways. One, you try and take control of oil everywhere that it's available. So you create either these multinational corporations or later these national producer companies that monopolize the production of oil. And the other thing is you do everything you can at the other end, at the consumption end, to create more and more demand for it, because that's the other way, as it were, to keep it scarce. So multinational oil companies from early on, from the interwar period, were involved in trying to manufacture very carbon-heavy forms of living, promoting the development of the car and of travel, publishing maps, publishing guidebooks in general, and lobbying against alternative forms of transportation, alternative forms of energy, so as to keep the oil scarce, as it were, from the other side.
It's time I was in.
That was Chatham in the Second World War in the film The Cruel Sea. The sound you can hear in the background is a tram. There were no trams in Chatham or anywhere in Medway during the Second World War, but the filmmakers felt there should have been, and they were right. Chatham had a fantastic tram network from about 1903. This spread to most of the rest of what is now Medway a few years later. But the local bus company took over the tram network and shut it down by 1931. The trams were lumbering great things that moved slowly and had to stick to the tracks. They took much of the workforce to and from Chatham Dockyard. They were the arteries that made this area work.
Luxembourg has become the first country in the world to make all public transport free of charge. The policy is part of a plan by the centre-left governing coalition to reduce traffic.
We've declared a climate emergency in the city. As a country, we're going through a climate crisis. Birmingham has the biggest air pollution challenge outside London. And at the same time, last year in a survey, thousands of Brummies told me that the buses aren't reliable enough, and if we can improve the reliability of the bus service in our city, which is obviously the main form of public transport in our city, they would consider leaving their cars at home. So we've announced 4 big moves today, and one of the key one for me is the reallocation of space, where we are prioritising buses with us through bus lanes or bus gates to improve the reliability right across our city. We're working very closely with our main bus operators in our deregulated bus market here in our city to ensure that we can introduce cross-city bus networks too. So what's absolutely fundamental is a city that's had a love for car and the over-reliance on car needs to change. We need to have a cultural change in our city.
A new international study suggests that air pollution around the world now rivals cigarette smoking as a leading cause of reduced life expectancy. Researchers from Germany's Max Planck Institute and the Mainz University Medical Center found that air pollution was responsible for shortening people's lives on a scale far greater than wars or diseases like malaria.
Extraordinary things have happened since the virus arrived. Amounts of money have been spent which are quite incomprehensible. Yet the gains to be made from eliminating PM 2.5 are far greater than those offered by the lockdown or the shutdown of our shops and industry. According to a Medway Council report, eliminating PM 2.5 could give every one of us an extra 7 to 8 months of life. Spread across the whole of England and Wales, that's an incredible 40 million years. Since COVID-19 tends to strike the old and infirm, 40 million years is vastly more than the toll from the virus. So far, at the beginning of August 2020, it's killed 46,413 people in the UK. Even if the average victim was going to live an extra decade, that's still less than 500,000 years. 500,000 compared to 40 million. And PM 2.5 keeps killing year after year. According to Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, the number of years of life lost as a result of the virus might be considerably less than 500,000. He looked at people aged over 80 and found that 10% would die in the next 12 months. People over 80 who got the virus also had a 10% chance of dying. In other words, the overall mortality rate was 0. The issue is more than the number of people who die. It's also about pulmonary and cardiovascular diseases. People get sicker at an earlier age, yet our life has been designed around the car. City centres are designed to serve the car. This means many people who are unable through disability, poor health or poverty to own a car have little or no access to our centres. They don't go out as much as they might. They get sicker earlier and require social care because they cannot look after themselves. So much life is lost because of the car. This is not freedom, but the opposite. I don't want your money or your votes. What I want is for you to get angry about something that is attacking you personally. Bad air quality. If half the fear generated by the virus could be transferred to getting rid of air pollution, all our lives could be immeasurably improved. It could be done. Technology allows the creation of an urban environment where transport is effectively free, yet there is no pollution. A new kind of tram network that operates 24 hours a day and has stops no more than 200 metres away from every household. But it is not going to happen all the time. Most people have never heard of PM 2.5. Get angry and live a longer, healthier life.